Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're opening up a psychological investigation into one of the absolute most misunderstood dynamics in human relationships. When we think of financial disagreements, we usually think of, well, bad budgeting, impulsivity, or maybe just a lack of financial literacy, right? But what if I told you that in certain relationships, financial chaos isn't an accident at all? It's architecture. What you're about to see here isn't a spending problem, not even close. It's actually a calculated psychological weapon designed for total control. We are going to completely deconstruct the hidden economics of narcissistic abuse. Okay, let's dive into this bizarre contradiction. Why will a millionaire happily buy a total stranger a round of drinks, but then ruthlessly fight their own spouse over a $30 utility bill? It's baffling, right? If someone has abundant resources, why weaponize petty cash against the people closest to them? To the outside world, this behavior literally makes zero sense. But acting as psychological investigators here, we can't just stop at the obvious explanation. We have to dig much deeper. Because that $30 utility bill, it is absolutely not about the money. It's about power dynamics. It's a localized test of dominance and reality distortion. To really get this, we have to treat this behavior almost like a crime scene to uncover the deepest psychological truth about narcissism and capital. As the researcher Sam Vaknin points out, money essentially acts as a powerful insulator. Think about it. For a healthy person, money is just a neutral medium of exchange. It's a tool. But for the narcissist, it's actually a substitute for genuine human connection. It functions like a shield that protects them from the consequences of their own misconduct, literally allowing them to bypass the normal, everyday rules of empathy and accountability. Chapter 1: The Architecture of Control. In any good psychological investigation, we always have to contrast what people see on the surface with what's actually happening underneath. On the surface, friends in society, well, they might just see a highly successful, charming individual, or maybe just a regular couple having normal financial spats. But behind closed doors, a terrifying machinery of coercive control is operating. The money is literally being used to systematically strip away the partner's autonomy, isolating them and making them entirely dependent on the abuser's fabricated reality. See, narcissistic financial abuse is profoundly different from standard financial infidelity. In this dynamic, money serves as what clinicians actually call narcissistic supply. Deep down, this individual harbors an incredibly fragile self-structure and profound feelings of inadequacy. So, to survive psychologically, they need this constant, tangible mirror that reflects their perceived superiority back to them. They objectify their partners, treating them not as autonomous human beings, but essentially as resources to be exploited, just to fund this grand illusion. Chapter 2: The Splitting Math Anomaly. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it forces us to look at the actual cognitive biases involved. We're transitioning from psychological motives to hard neurology here. The narcissistic brain literally processes fairness, equity, and shared resources differently than a healthy, collaborative mind does. They don't just act selfishly. Their mental ledger is fundamentally corrupted by their pathology. This isn't just greed, folks. It's a full-blown reality distortion field. You see, traditional economic models assume that humans make rational decisions to maximize utility. But the narcissist's economic model, it's completely skewed by ego preservation. Because their brain actively rejects the concept of genuine equality, they are entirely neurologically incapable of processing a mutual 50-50 distribution of anything. Let's completely deconstruct this bizarre math because it's wild. Imagine a household where the narcissist pays a $60 gas bill and the partner pays a $30 electricity bill. Now, a rational person sees $90 total, meaning each should pay $45. So the partner owes $15, right? But look at the narcissist's logic. They subtract the partner's $30 from their $60 and demand the partner pay them $30. Why on earth would they do that? Because the narcissist genuinely views their own payouts as total losses that must be recouped while treating their partner's contributions as having absolute zero value. It's a highly calculated formula for chronic, systematic financial extraction. Chapter 3: Evolutionary Smoke and Mirrors. So we've looked at the cognitive distortions. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at the evolutionary roots of this behavior. Because not all narcissists weaponize resources in the exact same way. The clinical taxonomy reveals 3 distinct phases of narcissism, and each one uses capital as a totally unique tool for survival and manipulation. First, the grandiose narcissist. They use wealth as a highly visible golden leash, spending recklessly on status symbols to signal superiority and basically force their partners into dependence. Then you have the vulnerable or covert narcissist. They actually weaponize a false narrative of poverty. They'll constantly complain about being broke just to guilt their partners into funding a parasitic lifestyle. And then there's the communal narcissist. This is the one who appears incredibly generous to the outside world, publicly giving away money while secretly starving their own family of resources behind closed doors. To really understand that communal narcissist, we actually have to look to evolutionary biology, specifically Zahavi's handicap principle. So in nature, a male peacock's massive tail is a handicap. It's a signal that says, hey, I am so genetically superior, I can survive despite carrying this huge burden. For the communal narcissist, ostentatious public generosity is their peacock tail. They engage in public altruism not because they want to alleviate the suffering of others, but to literally purchase social dominance. It's an evolutionary flex designed to establish undeniable superiority over the recipient and completely mask their utter lack of true empathy. Chapter 4. The Family Architecture. What happens when this kind of pathology is given total authority over a closed system? Let's shift now to the generational transmission of this abuse. Inside a narcissistic family, resources are not used to support a child's developmental autonomy. Not at all. Instead, inside this terrifying duality of the narcissistic home, children are basically drafted into calculated roles. They serve very distinct financial and emotional functions that are quite literally required for the parent's psychological survival. And this brilliantly illustrates the dynamic. You have the golden child, funded and praised conditionally, acting as a mirror for the parent's grandiosity. But in doing so, they completely lose their authentic selfhood. They just become an extension of the parent. On the flip side is the scapegoat, starved of resources and blamed for the entire family's dysfunction. They absorb all of the parents' repressed shame. Listen, these aren't real personalities the children just organically chose. They are calculated, assigned roles required to keep the parent's fragile ego from totally collapsing. And the long-term clinical consequences of this family architecture are just devastating. The data reveals a 50% higher likelihood of these children developing severe anxiety or depression. The narcissistic parent actively uses what we call financial triangulation, say paying for one child's college while flat out refusing to help the other, or constantly comparing their incomes. They do this to generate lifelong sibling rivalry. It basically ensures the children never unite, keeping them perpetually starved for approval and locked forever in a cycle of perceived inadequacy. Chapter 5. The Somatic Toll. Let's strip away the social and familial layers entirely for a second and look at the raw physical impact on the victim. We so often think of financial abuse as just a spreadsheet problem, right? A matter of debt or lost assets. But what is actually happening is a profound neurobiological hijacking. The victim's nervous system is fundamentally altered. Let's move on and see how this builds into a very real physiological crisis. This is the biological cascade of money trauma. Step 1. A simple trigger happens, something as small as checking a banking app. Step 2, because money has been relentlessly weaponized as a life-threatening danger, the brain experiences an amygdala hijack. This completely bypasses the prefrontal cortex, which is your logical processing center. And then, step 3, the victim enters a dorsal vagal state. This is a deep, deep neurological freeze. This isn't someone just avoiding making a budget. This is the human body physically bracing for a predator. And right here is where the psychological trap violently snaps shut. The abuser sits back, watches the victim experience this profound somatic trauma, this financial freeze, and they actually use that very panic as definitive proof of the victim's incompetence. It is relentless, calculated gaslighting. The victim is constantly told they're too anxious, they're too bad at math, they're just too emotional to handle the money. And over time, the victim deeply internalizes this sense of helplessness. Eventually, they surrender entirely, relying on the abuser to manage their very reality. Chapter 6. Breaking the Golden Leash.
We have deconstructed the abuse, the cognition, the evolution, and the neurobiology. Now, we absolutely must pivot to the resolution. The solution to narcissistic financial abuse is never ever found in trying to budget harder or taking a financial literacy class or trying to just communicate better with the abuser. You literally cannot reason with a pathology that requires your subjugation to survive. It requires a complete paradigm shift. So here is the clinical map to healing. Pillar 1. You must make sense of what happened. Recognize that the financial chaos was a calculated mechanism of control, not your personal failure. Pillar 2. Gain distance. You cannot negotiate with a narcissist about money. You have to build impenetrable boundaries to protect your own nervous system. And pillar 3, live in absolute defiance of the narcissist rules. Reclaim your capabilities, your inherent worth, and your authentic self, and step entirely outside that distorted reality they built for you.
The empty bank accounts, the bizarre circular arguments over a tiny utility bill, the paralyzing fear of just opening a credit card statement, none of it was actually about money. It was always about power, control, and the preservation of a remarkably fragile ego. You didn't fail at managing finances. You survived a systemic psychological hijacking. So the crucial point is this. It leaves us with one final, lingering mystery to really think about. If your financial anxiety was never actually about money, what else in your reality was secretly designed to keep you trapped?